Uh,
Hi.
Hello, Kelvin.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, now you're not available in an hour or two to continue.
Possibly. I got to run out in about an hour, and I got to prepare some stuff before I go out.
Okay, we'll see what happens here.
But if you're free later, I probably would be able to connect again when I get back. So.
Okay, we'll see. Now, did you just a second? Just want to clear the mucus out of my throat. Okay.
Gee, that sounds nasty.
Yeah, abnuchial muca. So
They cut down on that smoking habit there.
no, I don't smoke.
Oh.
It's just L.A. I think.
In L.A. Huh?
Yeah. Okay, so
That's a pack a day right there.
Yep. All right. Last week we rambled around, but we went back to your origins. That since that was sort of semi-informal, and not that this has to be more formal, but you said at the end let you think about it for a week. Is there any thoughts about what you said last week that you want to clarify first?
No, I'd rather, as far as clarifying stuff, just wait till we're done and then go through it,
Oh, okay.
Because it's not,
So we'll continue this sort of wandering around and see what we come up with. All right.
I think it's a good idea.
All right, now, just a minute, Carolyn, can you get that bag? All right. All right, now, I want to go into Beefheart, but before we do that, I think it's in Michael Gray's book on Zappa using the Pamela Zarubica manuscript. And we've got to the point where you're now living with Frank in New York, and then I was just going to bring up Pamela Zarubica comes to look after Gail because she's pregnant, and Frank goes to Europe. But
did she say that she went to look after Gail?
oh yeah, well I'll just clarify that. She came back from Europe in the summer of '67, say, because by September she goes to Europe for the British tour,
right,
where she's Susie Cream Cheese.
Right, that's when I met her.
Right, that when she passed through coming from California to New York.
Well, I went to Europe with them.
Oh, okay.
So we spent a lot of time together in Europe.
All right, and then Pamela then comes back. Well, what she says in Michael Gray's book, have you read Michael Gray's book?
I think I skipped through it. I don't have
Right.
a copy of it. So.
Well, he bases a lot of it on Pamela's manuscript. And Pamela says that her and Vicky, when they heard that Gail was pregnant, she was pissed, and and this is probably said facetiously, they were scheming how to go and beat the baby out of Gail's gut. You know what I mean? How to abort the baby.
Right.
Because she felt that Gail moved in on her man.
Right.
Even though it seems that Frank and her relationship were not sexual, but was rather ambiguous. But I think they had she was probably the most intelligent, quote, groupie around him, and she didn't consider herself a groupie. When she's in England, she said Frank gets sick one night, and then he's in a fetal position in bed, and she's with him, and he's shaking, and he can't take the responsibility of the success of his image that's suddenly been projected on him. And she gets very pissed off at him, says, I've supported you, I've come and helped you do this, and you say you want to be president of you can save democracy, and you can be president of the United States, and all this thing, and we're going to start a movement, and now you say you can't take it, and you want to withdraw from that responsibility, and she gets very pissed off at him at that point. Do you remember any talk with Pamela to you personally about that, her disillusionment with Frank?
No.
You don't remember any of that?
No, we never talked about that.
Is that something new to you, or did you know that's what happened?
I think I might have read that at some point.
Right, and because she's upset with Frank and Gail getting together, and you're saying you really never got involved with her on that level.
Well, first of all, it kind of I came in after that because when I met the period when you're talking about when she was upset with Gail coming on the scene would have been before they came to New York. That would have been in L.A.
That would be in '66.
Right.
Yeah, around the Lenny Bruce funerals when they met.
Yeah. So, it would have been actually probably up until Gail came to New York. So I don't really know what was going on at that point. only thing I would have heard would have been in retrospect from, reading what Pamela had said. She never really mentioned, we never talked about that.
Right.
Or if we did, I don't really remember anything,
Yeah, because she went to Europe once Frank and Gail got together in '66. She went to Europe, then she comes back.
She came to New York.
On the way to London.
Yeah, and I don't remember how long we were in New York before we went to London. I mean, how long she was in New York before we went to London, because I do remember quite a bit of period of her being in New York, but that was probably after we came back from London, most of that. So
yes,
it's hard to really separate the two. But
did she live with Frank and Gail?
Yeah, she did, at least part of the time.
So she seemed to have adapted to the situation. If she
Yeah,
comes.
I mean, I never really saw any animosity between them. They were good buddies, Gail and Pamela.
Oh, okay.
That period in New York, most of the time. I mean, I'm not sure, everything that happened or toward the end of the period, but when they were together, most of that time, they were, a couple of girlfriends.
Yes. All right. Now, that was at 54, was it, Charles?
Mostly, yeah, that was at 54A Charles Street because, I don't think she was there before we moved.
And then I guess she went to London after that. She's been to London for years, right?
Yeah, she went to, when we moved to California, she moved in the log cabin for a while. In fact, she was probably around most of that summer. We were only at the log cabin for about 3 months, I guess.
Yeah, and John Mayall has a song.
Yeah, I know.
With the address.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the address? 24 something?
2401.
2401.
LCB.
Yeah, because when I came through in '69 to meet Frank, it was March '70. I went to the log house. I went to that address on the John Mayall album. I got the address. I went there, and Frank had moved, so he's now up in on Woodrow Wilson. And the Time magazine October '69 picture of him was in front of Woodrow Wilson. And if you see that he came back to L.A. in May/June '68, he moves up to the new house pretty quickly, doesn't he?
Yeah, it was about, I'd say, the end of the summer. I think it was probably in September that they moved.
September '68,
here
right.
For a month or so.
They moved for a month?
I stayed there for a month or so after they moved. That is at the log cabin.
Yes.
And then moved out, and I think it was empty for a while after that too. But I guess that was only meant to be temporary until they found a place to buy, and they found a place to buy and then moved out.
Right. Now he was interviewed in the Rolling Stone that summer of '68. And then he got pissed off. He claims they, edited or screwed around with it. But there's a picture of him in the steamroller.
Right.
What ideas there? Were you part of the conceptualizing of that?
No.
Do you know what he was meaning by the steamroller?
Well, it was behind the hill at the log cabin.
Yeah.
Top of the hill there, they were constructing new roads up there, putting in new houses and stuff, and I'm sure they just went off looking for interesting places to shoot. And at the top of the hill was this construction area, and that's what that was. That was some sort of road building equipment.
Okay. So, because in the 80s in some song, I can't remember it now, he talks about steamroller. Is that a reference to that, or is there some other thing?
I doubt it, but I have no idea, unless what song is that?
Do you remember that, Jerry? It's in the middle 80s.
It's no, it's earlier than that. It's a Flo and Eddie song.
Oh yeah, maybe it's in Gregory Peccary, one of those.
Not Gregory Peccary. It's a Flo and Eddie song.
Right. It's one
Fillmore or 200 Motels.
Oh yeah, when they're doing the Mud Shark, and I've got the Fillmore, and it's a car. Now, that's interesting. How the Fillmore is a car, is a steamroller, and then you have the car as a major image on Uncle Meat, and the car is American culture. What do you make of this merging of popular music site like Fillmore and that? Is this Zappa's old car club theme, and rock is just a new car club? I think did you?
It's about tooth to me, but I don't understand the connection between Fillmore and car.
Oh, they call this car a Fillmore.
Oh.
I don't think there is a car called
that. But I think that the car is like such a major symbol in American culture that it would be hard for Frank to avoid it if he wanted to.
Right. Now here's where we get into the imagery. Because
no, I think the other thing with the old cars really comes from the connection of particularly Roy Estrada and the kind of Pachuco lowrider old 39 cars that they used to have,
Now, it's you just intuited what I was going to bring up.
But I also had an old car, which is why which is why visually the imagery was there a lot too, and I probably punched it a bit because I had a 39 Pontiac that I drove out from New York that I bought in Philly, and I had it in New York during the whole period I lived in New York, and then drove that out to California, and so that kind of was like my image of a neat old car,
Right. Now, it's amazing you mentioned 39 because you just intuited what I was going to bring up. Dave Wally gave me a copy of a letter that Frank wrote to John and Yoko after he met them in the Fillmore in '71. They were sort of feeling each other out to do a collaborative project. So Frank sent them a letter saying, well, if we do this, this is what you've got to find. And he describes a 39 Chevrolet, a really just one car that was last seen, 10 years before somewhere else. And they have to go and find that car to put into the installation if it was a museum piece. And I always wonder, why a 39 Chevy? Now, you're mentioning 39, Roy Estrada 39. Is there something about the 39 car that's better than the 49?
Oh, yeah.
What is it?
Well, it's a whole different era.
Right, but what's the difference?
39 was like the height of that Klondike car, with the big bulbous headlights.
Fast and bulbous?
Yeah, well, maybe, but I think that's a different reference. But after 39, I think in 1940, well, of course there was a transition period, but 39 was like the height of that, and then they started enclosing the lights in the fenders, so it was a whole different look.
Oh, I see. So
in the early 40s, But I think that, I don't know if that's necessarily the reason. I mean, the thing is that I think Roy had a 39 Chevy, or at least the 39 Chevy really refers to that Pachuco 39 car. Whether or not Roy had one or not, that was kind of the reference. The fact that I had a 39 car was
synchronicity. I mean, you had it before you knew them.
Also, yeah, but it was also again, it was really like this great year to have a car from, in my opinion,
Well, okay, I understand. See, the thing is that
I think also, there were probably the early 40s, the car situation was really weird because of the war.
Yeah.
Exactly when that started, but there were a lot less. There were a lot less early 40s cars than there were probably late 30s cars, so it was probably more available. I'm not sure, the distinction between 39 and 40, but I know some of the middle 40s are very hard to find cars from.
Right. So Roy Estrada at one point in his life had one that Frank knew he had.
I believe so. I'm not certain of that without checking, but
I remember the neat old car that Beefheart had up in Ben Lomond in '71. Do you remember what that was? I remember it when I was up to them after I saw you and up and saw Beefheart.
You're not talking about the white Jaguar.
Yeah, maybe that was what it was.
It also had some other old Hudson or something.
Right, but not a 39 Chevy.
No.
Yeah.
It's a little later period. I think it was a Hudson or one of those, kind of real bulbous in the back,
Right. Now, two images. I'm thinking. I'm looking at the back of One Size Fits All. In the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a 39 Chevy on the left
My
there?
39 Pontiac.
39 Pontiac?
No, that's not. I'm sorry. That's my 49 Plymouth. See, I also had a 49 Plymouth.
I see. All right. So, anyways.
But this was a later era. I mean, this was 10 years later. No, 10 years, 6, 7 years later, whatever it was.
So in '71, I can see why Frank, who's always using his personal experience to and project it out, a 39 Chevy would be common to Roy and you, and so that's why it would fit into his mythos. And that's why
now I don't want to take that credit particularly, but
No, it's just a quick. Okay, he has two friends who have one,
right.
and then he tells John Lennon. Maybe Roy's got stolen right at that point, or he's recalling it being stolen, and he just tells Lennon to go get one if he wants to work with Frank, right?
Yeah, but again, I really think that 39 Chevy was also, besides specifically Roy's car, I think it was also like the hot Pachuco car from that era.
Right.
So it was like
Reuben and the Jets would
lowrider car that they wanted, basically.
Well, yeah, Reuben and the Jets would want that car.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so then now, did I discuss the dwarf motif with you last time?
Please, not again.
Yeah. Okay, we did that, right?
Yeah, we did
Right.
that.
Okay. You say in the interview in Seconds that One Size Fits All was based on a story.
The cover.
Yeah. What is the story?
Well, the story is the lyrics in Sofa. I mean, it's not a story so much as elements of Sofa.
Of the skit that they
And,
of the skit they were doing with Magic Sofa and the God and the Pig and all that.
Well, without going and listening to the album, I couldn't tell you the references. But the references in the song Sofa are about the sofa and God creating the universe and all, right?
Right. So that is the story that
That's
you're
what I meant by story.
Right. It's not the whole album like One Size Fits All. It's the story of Sofa.
Right.
Okay. Now you say that Uncle Meat was not based on a story from Frank.
Right.
It was your own thing.
Right.
Now what is we know that Frank would use Uncle Meat as an evil scientist, bring Reuben the Jets in. Is that your concept? Isn't that his?
No, I'm talking about the cover art, not the concept of Uncle Meat.
You're talking about the story of the imagery that you created.
No, right. I'm talking about the artwork on the cover of the Uncle Meat album.
Oh, not a story. Okay.
No, there's a story there, really.
All right.
That's the one that Watson dreamed up.
Right. Why does Uncle Meat look like he does on Grand Wazoo? Is there anything you're thinking of?
Well, it's a kind of this is funny actually because my uncle had a restaurant up in Pleasant Valley, PA here.
Yeah.
And a bunch of the locals there were Zappa fans, and when they found out that Ernie was my uncle, they brought in a copy of the Grand Wazoo and showed it to him. I don't think he had seen it before that. And he turned it over on the back and said, "That's my father." The thing is, I just drew this old man, and it came out looking like my grandfather, basically. I mean, the character of Uncle Meat was pretty simply an old man.
Right. In other words, your uncle saw his father in it, and you had not thought of that.
No, I had thought of it, but it wasn't like I intentionally drew my grandfather. It's just that when I drew an old man as this character, it came out looking like my grandfather.
And you didn't realize it?
Well, I did realize it, yeah, but I mean, it wasn't like I used my grandfather as a model. It's just that the character came out looking like my grandfather.
And then after it was done, oh, that looks like my grandfather.
Yeah.
And then Ernie, this guy that the kids came to, recognized it.
Yeah, right. My Uncle Ernie recognized it, which proved the point that I had discovered myself.
Right. Okay, so that's Uncle Meat. Now, did Frank discuss with you, I've just talked to Nigel, who was really good in talking, she at least had many conversations in her short period with Frank, many intellectual conversations, which are really useful to refer to ideas in his albums that she can recite conversations. What do you remember Frank talking about his fascination that sound could be used to make massive bowel movements in an audience? You ever heard him talk about that?
Well, I remember discussions, not so much with me as in general, maybe with several people.
In the band?
Using, or with Gail and other people that might have been around when I was there working or something, about using sound to control the audience. And I would say, No, the way you just put it was not really the way that Frank put it. I mean, I would say that he, in reference to controlling them, he might have said something like, I can make them shit on cue or something, you know. So I wouldn't exactly say that that was the sole purpose of controlling them with sound. That was just a metaphor for it.
Right, but he did say, I can make them shit on cue.
Yeah.
Now, these are New York 19...
I mean, I don't remember exact words, but probably something like that.
Right, and these are New York 1967 Charles Street conversations.
Around that period, or maybe even a little earlier, when they were at the Garrick. I mean, that was one of the things that he was doing at the Garrick, supposedly. But, you know, I think he was exaggerating myself, obviously.
Right.
But I think his point was, and I think he mentioned it in the Jazz and Pop interview with
Kopsky.
Yeah, about his experiments with controlling the audience in terms of getting them in certain moods and getting them frenzied and stuff like that. You know?
That's right, yeah. Because that is spelled out in the Uncle Meat story, working with plants. That reference of scientists using sound to make plants grow.
Right.
So that was just archetypalizing what he was doing musically at the Garrick Theater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was taking it obviously to extremes that were not really possible.
Right.
You know.
Okay, so the...
I thought they were, but I don't even think so. I think he was, you know, creating a cartoon of it, of the concept.
Yeah, and ultimately, is Frank a cartoonist, ultimately?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because that would merge his music and his graphic drawing origins. You know, his drawing as a kid, he was a very good drawer.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you bring up an interesting point. I mean, Gail has always remained behind the scenes and, in a way, while Frank was alive, played down her involvement intellectually with Frank, but it was always hinted at. Now, you just gave us a little example. He was explaining to Gail and a few other people this thing. How much did you notice Frank articulating to Gail his concepts, or how much was she just eavesdropping on it and not understanding, or do you feel that Gail understood Frank and there was an ongoing debate or argument or dialogue between the two of them that was sort of off stage and not around the musicians?
I would say the latter, you know, more that Gail was certainly part of the dialogue and that he discussed things with her, ideas with her, and sure.
Was she an intellectual?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was an intellectual, right?
Uh-huh.
And in the public image, you just...
Very intelligent person, yeah.
Right, and the public images of her just the mother, so to speak. You know, the tolerant wife who's handling the kids while Frank's on the road all the time.
Well, in the earlier years, yeah, and I think also that was certainly the cultural image of the wife at the time, anyway.
Right, I mean in the 70s, but, I mean, she was... People wouldn't know who she was, but...
When she got more involved in the business, which would have been more in the 80s, I guess, but even possibly the late 70s.
Yeah, but really in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then there's that business person. But I'm talking about the person, that young woman you see with Pamela Zarubica, where Frank calls her my young pumpkin and all this stuff. No, people at that point wouldn't know who she was unless they were really close to the scene.
Probably, yeah.
But that was, it looks like a smart person. You saw her, she was intellectually attracted to Frank's intellect. Would you say that?
I'm sure I probably would, but I don't like to talk about Gail.
Right, but we can talk about this period without, you know, casting aspersions on her. The thing is that
no, I'm not thinking about the casting aspersions. It's just, well, first of all, you know, it's the things that you're talking about are true, but I hate to. It almost is. It almost is too simplistic, you know, to say.
All right, can we look...
Obviously, people's relationships are much more complicated than just any one, you know, description of...
Right, but here, she is supposed to...
Yeah, she was a very intelligent person, and she was involved in, I would say, in Frank's concepts, maybe even had, you know, maybe she even inspired some ideas that he had. But they were close, and they discussed things, you know, from my observation when I was around working, because I did work in Charles Street. I worked at Frank's house a lot. We had a little studio there that I worked at, in addition to working at my own studio now and then. And yeah, they, you know, she was involved in what was going on.
Did you see Was Pamela's Rubica involved at that house in intellectual conversations?
Yeah, but when you say intellectual conversations, I'm not sure what you mean.
What I mean is that Frank would discuss his ideas with them, what he thought he was doing, what sort of big picture he was creating music within.
Well, yeah, but Frank, and it wasn't like Frank would sit around and have bull sessions with people. It just wasn't his style.
Right.
First of all, when he was always working, if he would, there were maybe the odd time that he might be entertaining guests or something, but when he was home and there wasn't a guest that he had to entertain, mostly either for business or another musician or something, then he was working, or if he was socializing and there wasn't someone around, then he probably would go out, to a club or to the Tin Angel or someplace and hang out. I'm talking about in New York particularly, because after New York, the Log Cabin I was around, but after that I wasn't around a lot during social times.
Right.
But during that period, the judgment I would make is that Frank was generally working, and when you were having this type of intellectual discussion with Frank, or there was an intellectual discussion of the type you're talking about, it was primarily Frank talking about the concepts on the music he was working on at the time, and other people participating in the conversation.
Right.
Hang on one second.
Yep.
He's probably going to want to go soon.
No, don't say anything about it.
Well, no, I'm not.
Well, no, we want to. If we keep Calvin interested, maybe he'll forget that he has to go away. He has to go away, but no, I wanted all the tapes so Calvin can hear this. We're discussing, Calvin, how we're seducing you to stay on the video longer, even though you do have a pressing schedule, probably. Well, we can eke another 5 minutes out, maybe. Okay. So to wrap that up, the rumors are that Gail is going to do a book on Frank. I'm looking forward to her giving some concepts in the book and looking at Frank's work based on conversations she had with Frank, and that she was.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah, and you're saying that she'd be bright enough to do that.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Now let's go into Beefheart land.
Okay.
I noticed in the interview in Seconds. You went out to the trailer court in Lancaster where he was staying in middle 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I visited there in 77, went to the trailer court, and we just went out there a couple of days ago to photograph, Lancaster stuff, and I went and showed Jerry the trailer court, and Mrs. Vliet is not listed to be inhabiting there anymore. You don't know what happened to her, do you?
No, but this is 20 years ago, and she was an older woman.
Right.
So maybe I don't know if she's still alive or not.
Right. Now
but even because she moved out of the trailer when Don moved in. I'm not sure where. She wasn't living there when they were living there. At least not at that time.
In the middle 70s.
Yeah, or at least during that particular period when I was going out there a bit. So it's possible she moved. She's living wherever it is that she had moved. If she's still alive, don't know.
Well, Jerry remembers.
I went there in the 80s.
Jerry went there in the 80s and visited her in the trailer court.
Oh, yeah? So she moved back in, I guess.
Yeah, maybe moved back in. I sort of had the feeling she was there in 77, though I wasn't sure.
She wasn't living there at the time that I was visiting.
Right. Now, here's the question. Is that the trailer court that Don grew up in the 50s?
I don't know. I wouldn't know.
Yeah, because I would imagine his father had a bread truck and all that. That was probably a house more in town rather than on the edge of the desert. That's what I'm imagining. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then Don leaves Lancaster.
It would just be totally speculation.
Yeah. So you don't mean that's. See, you say that's where Don lived all when he was young. You didn't mean the trailer. You meant Lancaster.
Yes, sir.
You're right. Now, I've interacted with Beefheart several times. Now, you were asked in seconds what you couldn't remember particular episodes, but you do say very tantalizingly that you discussed art and philosophy with him.
Mm-hmm.
Can you remember some of those kind of conversations? He told me that he had a great art teacher. He liked, what he told me when I was with him in 77 is that he liked going to second-rate colleges because they would have the professors who weren't playing the game enough to end up in Harvard. And they'd be the more interesting professors.
Mm-hmm.
Did he ever tell you that idea about
No.
Did he have a knowledge of art history?
Yeah, I think so.
Would that require him having gone to school in high school?
Necessarily, because I mean, I've pretty much gained my knowledge outside of school.
Right, but you know the myth is he didn't go to school. But Frank talks about them being in high school together, so he probably wasn't that removed from the school world. He was in and out, I guess. Would you say that?
I don't really know anything about his education, to be honest.
But you know of the myth that he never went to school. You remember that?
Well, when you say he never went to school, you mean he didn't go to high school?
Well, he said in the Rolling Stone interview in 1970, the statement was that he never went to school. He never went, which, is against the law, basically, right?
Well, that could mean any of a number of things. I mean, I could have said I never went to school too because I played hooky a lot.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I never went. Yeah.
Okay, would you say that Beefheart, how much was he aware of metaphor in his talk? How much was he using metaphor? Like, he told me that he could never play football because when he held the football, he kept thinking of his father's slippers. And it was so distracting he couldn't concentrate on football. So Beefheart always acted out this, or suggested he had this hypersensitivity on all sensual levels, right? All sense levels. Was there a metaphor or was that a fact?
Well, it's hard to say because I think there was a little of both. Pete Johnson once said, do you know Pete Johnson?
No.
He worked at Warner Brothers. I don't really know what his job was, but he knew Don pretty well, and he once just said that Don is like always acting from the id or the subconscious or something,
That means unconsciously.
Well, I don't know unconsciously. I mean, I think that maybe it's just his subconscious, his id self was more on the surface, more conscious,
Well, okay, then.
I don't think that means that you're necessarily unconscious. It's just simply that there's more of the subconscious in the conscious, maybe.
Would you say Frank was like that, even though his image was not so much like Don? He was, according to Nige, he was pretty sensual and had synesthesia in his being.
Yeah, but on a totally different level because Frank was so controlling and controlled.
In that sense, Frank was more conscious.
Well, see, I don't necessarily agree with that distinction between the conscious and the subconscious as one being totally controlled and the other being uncontrolled.
Right.
In fact, I don't even really I think that the whole conscious-subconscious
split
schism is an arbitrary distinction, really.
Right.
And they're just words. It's really a spectrum. It's a scale, from the outer to the inner.
All right. And so on that scale, Beefheart was a different spot than Frank.
Well, it's even more complex than that. In that, I think that you're asking me for my judgment.
Yeah.
I think that it's not just one thing. It's not just the outer to the inner in a scale.
Yes.
You could even further say that it's much more amorphous than that.
Right. But you would
just unconscious, or from the conscious to the unconscious.
Right. But you're
parts,
What?
There's a lot of
other parts?
Elements that are being labeled as conscious and unconscious.
Yes. Now, would you say that that Beefheart was, in the way you're talking about, Beefheart was more in touch with his instinctive than Frank? Would you say that?
I hate to make those judgments because
But that is the general impression that people have, right?
I think I think as a general impression you could say that, but again, I really think that we use both in different ways, and sometimes it's more obvious than not. I mean, maybe it's more obvious that Frank was much more controlling and conscious, and Beefheart was much more abstract and unconscious. But I think that they both just used both parts in different ways.
Okay, that word abstract is key, because would Don be, when he discusses his making his music as sculpture, which Frank would slip in that metaphor too, did you discuss the sculptural metaphor that Don used in your discussions with him in relation to making art?
Possibly.
So,
I can't, it's very hard for me to really remember any specific discussions that we had about the philosophy of art. In fact, I don't think we really had a lot of deep discussions about the philosophy of art or anything.
You would talk about particular artists.
Yeah, we might talk about, like, this artist is, like this and that, but mostly we painted and talked about what we were doing, painting, as opposed to talking about the philosophy behind it.
Right, well, you mean you're painting on your canvases beside each other?
Yeah, it would be painting
and he goes, this what I'm...
and then just kind of rapping about this and that.
About what you're trying to paint. Explaining the painting to each other.
Yeah, but maybe other things too. But, the other problem that I have is that because we were doing that and not actually just engaged in philosophizing,
yeah,
I was pretty much in another state of mind than one that would be thinking about talking so much. So that's why it's hard for me to really remember what we were
talking
about, because when I'm painting and talking and, kind of socializing and maybe philosophizing in a way about things, I'm probably in a more right-brained mode and less liable to remember the specifics about what we're talking about.
Right. Now, if you believe in life after death, and you can go to the Akasha records and see all time, for me, an interesting point to see Beefheart would say about 1960 to 64. What did that young man look like? How did he interact with Lenny Bruce, whoever he interacted with? I mean, he's going to Studio Z a bit. You ever wonder about what he looked like, what his body energy was at that age before you met him?
Well, I've seen some photos that probably would give me an idea, as I recall.
Well, the photos of him in that merry-go-round footage that Frank has, he's kind of boyish looking, he still looks like that little kid in the Troutmask replica.
Yeah.
But that Salvador Dali sinister Lord Buckley aspect shows up by 68, 69 or something. And so where's the transition from the little boy to the Buckley, Lord Buckley kind of effect? That's when he was. Did he ever talk about when he went to R&B, when he went out and went to groups or clubs?
Well, maybe.
In that earlier period. But you can't remember.
Asking the wrong person, because I'm so bad at remembering conversations. I might remember if someone mentioned something, I might remember it. I can't remember that. No.
Okay, so the point was.
I remember going places and sitting around with Don and drawing and we used to go a lot to just go to Denny's and hang out and draw.
Right.
He'd have his tablet, I'd have my tablet, and we'd just be drawing stuff, drawing people.
Is there only one Denny's in Lancaster?
Well, I'm thinking about also when he would come into town, into Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
To go places, too,
So it's a climate that you associate with Beefheart.
I guess you could say that, yeah.
It's a whole atmosphere, environment, sort of mood around him that was what you're excited about when you think back about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the youth culture brought people around. Okay, the rock musicians come out in the middle '60s, and Crawdaddy and these magazines start, and then the young college kids interview these rock stars, and then the rock stars have to come up with concepts, right? If it gets to that level.
Mm-hmm.
But you're implying that the concepts were maybe after the fact.
Yeah.
Well, no, maybe not. It's just that Beefheart, when you're with.
Well, I wouldn't put when you the statement you just made about what did you just say about magazines?
Oh, I'm just saying that because people didn't interview Elvis look in an art history kind of way. It was when you had the baby boomer generation in the late '60s starting magazines like Rolling Stone and Crawdaddy, and Dylan stimulated this sort of abstract thinking or intellectual kind of stuff. Then you'd have these interviews come around and interviewing people like Zappa and Beefheart and trying to project sort of interesting knowledge into them or have their opinions, intellectual stuff. But with Zappa and Beefheart particularly, they either instinctively knew what they wanted to do and didn't have to talk concepts, but when later in the '70s they're interviewed and they talk concepts like, well, I consider my work my baby. I don't have any children, I make my baby. Or I'm doing sculpture. It's not that they had talked about you, who was an insider in the earlier years with that stuff. That's what they came up with when those kind of people asked them those questions. So that it wasn't, they weren't that intellectual or had it planned out. I guess they weren't that philosophical is what you're saying.
Well, I don't know that they necessarily weren't that philosophical, but maybe they weren't that into discussing the philosophy so much.
Right. They didn't want, because when I was with Beefheart in '77, we're driving back into town in the car, and he was really not Beefheart as the image was of him, and I'd been with him several times, but he was very normal, and we could talk about stuff. Like I said, do you think this is the end times? He said, no, it's just a transition in civilization to a new situation. You know, you could talk those kind of big picture things with him that no one ever got in interviews with him. That's why I was wondering if you got that kind of talk from him.
Yeah, that's why I think it's hard for me to say, what we talked about. Because it was just, we would just talk about whatever.
Vague generalities or something.
Well, just whatever,
Or the news.
Really vague, and then, or art in terms of, working on art as opposed to the great depth of the philosophy behind art.
Right, because when I talked to Beefheart, I then used to talk to him on the phone in the late '70s, and he was very tuned into the news. Now, maybe that's because he was living in the trailer, but when a satellite went down in Canada, he really wanted me to find out what the hell was going on. He wasn't that like a desert guy, totally out of touch.
Oh, no, he knew what was going on. On the other hand, though, I think that he did have a tendency to look at the metaphor. You're talking about metaphor.
Yeah, he did have a poet. He was like Dylan in a sense. He could see the metaphor.
And he also had a tendency to kind of exaggerate. Like you're talking about
the father, the football.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would have a tendency to look at something going on and exaggerate it, and in a sense that.
Which meant he was more abstract than Frank in that level. In his immediate recording of impressions.
Yeah, I guess. I don't really know what I'm trying to say either, to be honest.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is that Frank's born December 21st and Don's January 15th. Basically, they're the same sign.
Are they?
Yeah, that's Capricorn.
Right. Yeah.
Some people say, December 21st is on the cusp of Sagittarius and Capricorn, so you can slip it either way. But they're born the same time, and if one considers them different, then they disprove astrology really greatly because they're so different and they're born the same sign.
Well, I don't think, first of all, I don't think that such a simple thing would prove or disprove astrology, but as far as characteristics that people would have if they're astrological, I think that they're much more complex than just
right
for that one thing.
But I always surprise people when I point out that they were born under the same sign, because people see them as so different. In their impressions of the two.
Well, they are very different, even though they may have a lot of similarities.
All right, now as we're talking, I'm looking at the one size fits all. Are there reasons why you predict? Did you control the imagery on the back cover of One Size Fits All? You did the most input on it.
Yeah, I would say so.
But there's so many, as Ben Watson brings out in his book. There's so many references to the Zappa world, like round things are boring and particular people. Is that based on your memories of the Zappa reference points?
Now, yeah, it is. But don't forget, round things are boring was mine.
Oh, that comes from you?
That comes from me, yeah.
Who's saying it on Lumpy Gravy?
That's me saying it on Lumpy Gravy.
Is that in Ben?
I don't know.
That's not maybe not. Are you giving credit on the album?
No, I don't think so. There are no specific credits. I'm just listed as a member of the chorus.
Right, but in Civilization Phase 3, he doesn't have you down as a voice saying that, I don't think.
Is he crediting what's on Lumpy Gravy?
Yeah, isn't that right, Jerry? He's pretty particular about who says what. If you had Civilization Phase 3, the booklet Jerry pulled out, we could just check it.
Yeah, but keep on talking.
Yeah, the point.
I have a copy here myself, actually.
Yeah, Jerry's looking at it. It's all right. The point is, you know you said it, and it's your voice saying that at the end of Lumpy Gravy.
Yeah.
And that was not in the piano?
Yeah, that was in the piano.
Oh, so you were part of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm also, what's the other thing I'd say? Very distraughting.
Yeah. That was
Gail,
good.
I'm in there with Gail when I said that. But those are, I think, the only two things that I said. There might be another one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, is that distraught? I mean, being distraught. Distraughting.
Yeah.
There's no such word, is there?
I don't think so.
Now, that is philosophical conversations. Even though, I mean, Frank creates a philosophical effect by collaging these so-called absurdist things. That's the philosopher in Frank, how he would evoke that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But he wasn't being like Beefheart. They weren't into the content. They were almost satirizing or pointing out how people attempt to philosophize.
Sure. Well, you say they. I wouldn't say that Don was that way as much as Frank.
Oh, okay. There's a difference.
I mean, Frank was certainly much more into, well, let's say Frank was much more the cynic, than Don.
Yes.
I wouldn't say Don was cynical at all, actually.
But he was more, in his actions, the way he retreated from the mainstream so much, you could say, well, he's, not very optimistic about the way technology is going.
I don't know. I mean, I've retreated from the mainstream, but I'm actually very much involved in technology and modern life, so to speak.
But to say that Don, I would say Frank is less cynical, even though his concepts are cynical, less cynical because he stays and works in the mainstream and doesn't drop out as much as Don.
Well, I don't think that has anything to do with being cynical.
Oh, okay.
And actually, I'm talking more about their art, than their actual lifestyle. But I think the main reason that Don was less mainstream was that he didn't have the money that Frank had because he wasn't supporting himself as well with his art.
Right.
It was much less successful financially than Frank was at that time, and so he was forced to live in the trailer. I don't think it would have been necessarily his desire to live in a trailer, if he could afford to live in a better situation.
Right. Now you're saying that in their art.
My judgment of it.
Yeah, in their art, Don is more optimistic, less cynical.
I'm not necessarily. Well, see, to me, I'm not drawing what's the word I'm looking for here? A connection between optimistic and pessimistic and cynical, and what would be the opposite of cynical?
Nonsense.
Apocalyptic.
To me, cynical doesn't mean, isn't the opposite of optimistic.
Right, okay.
Isn't necessarily pessimistic. Cynical to me is skepticism to the extreme, it's...
and Don wasn't that. Don is
no,
not...
I don't think Don was cynical.
Okay, let's just hold that, because I'm looking at your chart here. It's amazing. Why did you put in booties?
Well, you know what, can you hang on a minute?
Yeah.
You have a minute to hold?
We got all day.
Okay, well, just hold on a minute. I have to go to the bathroom.
All right.
Hang on a second.
See, Calvin, we fooled you. You're supposed to be gone to business immediately. Now you're going to keep talking. Well, isn't that neat?
He's not credited in fucking...
isn't that incredible? It's on
Civilization. Do you know his voice is in Civilization also? Round Things Are Boring? This is Civilization.
He may not be, that line may not be on Civilization Phase 3. That's right.
Right, okay, so...
but he's not credited at all on this. But
Civilization,
right.
That's Civilization booklet. Now,
right.
in the other thing, he is credited chorus, voice.
Oh, okay. All right, so he's credited, but I don't think since we don't know who the voices are until Civilization Phase 3 comes out, it tells you who the people are.
Right.
Right?
Who says what? Did you ever read that?
What?
Read it.
Which part?
That little
Hey,
paragraph.
I have a copy of that here somewhere. Let me just grab that.
Civilization Phase 3?
What?
Of what? Oh, of one size fits all, right.
It's all.
Yeah.
But tell me, did you find the reference in Civilization?
Okay.
They're not in there.
Now, here's the thing. You're not listed on Civilization Phase 3, but I don't think the phrase round things are boring is on Civilization Phase 3. But the point is what the thing I liked about Civilization Phase 3, you now could follow who said what.
Mm-hmm.
It tells which person said what.
On that album, right?
On that album, but you can. It also has stuff from Lumpy Gravy, doesn't it? Well, the same voices.
Yes.
You can recognize
But
voices.
it's not the same. But it's not Lumpy Gravy. It's some of the people. It's some
Right, it's
other material that was recorded during that.
Right.
it's just credited 67 voices, 1967 voices.
Right. The thing is that because that was mapped out there, I then could go back to Lumpy Gravy and see who was saying what. That's how it helped me. You know what I mean?
I think I'm on. Yeah, I don't think I'm on Civilization Phase 3.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm not mentioned.
Yeah. That's why you can't map it back.
You need a map to who's on Lumpy Gravy to tell who's on Lumpy Gravy.
Right. Well, Civilization Phase 3 gives you can then match the voices, so you know who's saying what.
But I have trouble figuring out who's who on Lumpy Gravy myself.
Well, this is how you figure it out. You listen to Civilization 3, get to know the voices, then re-listen to Lumpy Gravy, and you can figure out. That's what I did.
But see, there are some voices that are very similar.
Right.
I can even hear voices that sound like me that I know are not me on Lumpy Gravy.
Well, that's why I'm surprised, because I probably figured out that Louis or somebody said round things are boring, and based on my matching.
Right.
But the fact that your name is not there on the Civilization Phase 3 match to work with, I can't work with your name. I don't even project it in there.
So there might be other people on Lumpy Gravy, too, that aren't on the other one, but I'm not sure. I think mostly it's just the voices that are...
But Ben Watson is the first guy to, exegete, work out the Lumpy Gravy stuff and voices. It's good that he did that.
I have to go back and read what he said about that. I don't remember now.
No, it's very good. But the point is, the basic structure of his book is around the theme of round things are boring. Now, how Frank...
Really?
Oh, yeah, and how Frank reacted to that. And now, he should know that Calvin Schenkel said it.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Right, because now because he makes a big deal out of round things are boring as the outer rim of this one size fits all. Round the bottom right, round things are boring.
Right.
He says that because it's on the outer sphere, therefore that's a key motif in Frank, and he works a lot of his book around that. If he found out that Calvin Schenkel said it and probably stuck it on the one size fits all because it's your own reference point.
Yeah.
It's you.
Yep.
It's your own megalomaniac trip. You've got yourself as a sphere.
Thing.
What?
But don't let anybody know.
No, we don't tell. We don't tell.
Tell Ben?
Don't tell Ben?
No, we don't want anybody to know that I'm behind the whole thing.
But no, can we tell people that Calvin said round things are boring?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, we can tell you said that on Lumpy Gravy, but they've got to figure out what one size fits all is doing.
I think that maybe it's true I haven't gotten credit for some things that other people have thought of, but...
That gives them slack.
But you know what I mean? We can tell them that you said the thing on Lumpy Gravy,
yeah.
But it's up to them to figure out what I just figured out about the chart here.
No, you can tell them that too. I don't care.
Okay, what can't we tell them?
That I'm behind the whole thing. Frank was just a puppet.
No, I don't. I'm not saying, I didn't say that. I'm just saying you're behind this whole chart. No, your mind is organizing a key part of this thing, which you designed, and Ben is saying that's Frank's concept.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And he needs
to... To Ben's credit, at least he gives me some credit. I mean, for the first time, actually, and really talks about my input.
Yeah, but input in the general Zappa scene.
No, I mean specifically when he talks about the album covers, he does give me credit for certain things.
Well,
that's the first time I've actually seen that. Prior to that, any credit or references that I've got were only very small general things. So that's the first that I've seen any real insight into the work that I contributed as an individual,
No, yeah, that's what I mean. He is crediting your involvement with Frank, and it's spelling it out in detail.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's the first time that's
been
done.
That's great.
And, to any great extent. And So I give him credit for that. If he missed some things, then, you know, maybe it'll come out eventually. I don't care.
Right. Well, as I look at this chart, I mean, I always look.
Let's go over the chart because
this is
really primarily mine. I mean, there are some other. I don't remember exactly. Actually, you know, I'd say 99% of it is mine. Although, when I was working on it, I was working with someone else, with a guy named Napoleon.
Yeah.
Does Jerry know Napoleon?
No. What's his last name?
Lynn Lascaro, the artist Napoleon. Not Napoleon Brock.
No.
His last name is spelled what?
Lascaro.
Oh.
Lynn Lascaro.
Oh, Lynn Lascaro.
Yeah.
Why do you call him Napoleon?
Well, that was just his nickname, Napoleon.
Oh, yeah, I don't know him, but I think I know about him.
Yeah, I thought you might have met him at some point. Anyway, we were working together on a bunch of different projects at the time, and he was helping me with this one. And the one thing that he's credited for is doing the sofa, which actually what he did was he did the final painted version of the sofa. I drew the thing in detail, and then he did a kind of a pastel version of it on velour paper, which was pasted on top of the artwork.
Right.
So he executed my design, essentially, of the sofa. But, well, he's this, like, very comic guy, you know, very, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Very witty. And so when I was working on the star chart, he was around helping me, you know, work on this and some other projects. And so we would kind of goof together coming up with names. So when I say it's mine, I mean it was coming from me as opposed to Frank. But a lot of the satire was also from him.
A lot of the puns and that.
A lot of the puns, yeah. And it'd be really hard for me to pick out which. I mean, I can tell you very specifically some of them, but a lot of them I think were just when we were sitting around, you know, goofing on it.
Right. Now here's the thing: is that I would have always liked to have talked to Frank in detail about this chart. And I never got a chance to.
Well, I don't know what he would have to tell you because...
No, but wait a minute. I just didn't finish that. And then Ben, I was glad that Ben sort of went through it a bit. That was good. That's, in a way, indirectly talking to Frank because someone was paying attention to it. But then Frank died, so we didn't get a chance. But the point is, Frank had nothing to do with it on a major level.
Right.
I can talk to the person who made the chart.
That's right.
We're happening. So that's why we should really develop this because it's really, this is you. You're putting in quotes from Zappa albums. It's like... You know, you have all these Zappa references that you've experienced through the albums and being around them, and you're making a design here, and there's some of them are pretty amazing. Like why? Now, maybe some of them, like you have Irwindale and Sunday 22, Zubin Mehta, you know, obvious Zappa reference points.
Right.
But then you have David Booties and Arcturus. Now, what would you be if it's just a pun and that's it?
Well,
but what are you doing there?
The starting point was an actual star chart, so
right.
Most of the puns are in some way related to an actual star chart. Not all of them, but David Booties is a reference, obviously, to David Bowie, but the actual constellation that was the starting point was Booties.
It was.
I don't know the spelling of it, but I'm sure there's a constellation called Booties.
Oh, there is, and it's a very important constellation. Which that we won't go into that. It's just for the record, the civilization making the crop circles is from Booties.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's by my own sources. But we don't want to get distracted on that. That's just something interesting.
Yeah.
And but you got it spelled exactly right. It's B-O-O umlaut T-E-S. That's
right.
The way it is. Now I wouldn't think of David Bowie, but the point is that this is a map then of the two factions in Grand Wazoo, the two music industry fighting each other. If this is a pun on stars in rock and roll, on one level.
Well, not in general, but just that. Actually, that's probably the only one that is a pun. What's the other? What would be the other one?
Okay, now what did you do, Joe's Garage?
He didn't answer his question.
What?
He just said that's the only musical reference.
Yeah.
That I can think of.
Oh, that's all right. No, yeah,
that's enough. You're saying.
Well, yeah, my idea is not. It's not really all about the star map of the '70s, so to speak. You know, but the thing is, okay, what was I going to say? Grand Wazoo. What was it?
The war between.
Yeah, we did that. No, the.
Something on
Oh yeah.
Broadway
Did
Zoo.
you do Joe's Garage cover? Who did that?
John Williams.
Okay, you didn't do that.
But Grand Wazoo, you were going to say.
But like you take the image of the central scrutinizer.
Mm-hmm.
If you actually read what it is, it's a UFO vehicle merged with probably a 39 Chevy. It's really amazing what is embedded in that image of the central scrutinizer.
Mm-hmm.
And another part of it is the industrial vacuum cleaner. The hoses of that is in the central scrutinizer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why would you have the industrial vacuum cleaner dancing about?
Well, that's, from Chunga's Revenge. The industrial vacuum cleaner was the first time that image came out was in Chunga's Revenge, although I think the concept goes back to where I read somewhere about from Paul Buff's studio or something. There was a vacuum.
That's right, yeah.
But who invented it? Do you know?
That industrial vacuum cleaner? Paul invented it.
Paul invented the Chunga concept?
No,
who invented the Chunga concept? Was it Frank or was it someone else?
I don't know. It's just that it's a monster. It's a movie monster, I always thought.
No, it's a mutant industrial mutant.
That's Chunga, the vacuum cleaner.
Right.
But I don't know who invented. I've never had anybody. No one's ever really gone into what Chunga.
Because when I would be curious about that through interviews with some of the other band members, because my recollection is that somebody else came up with it.
The name Chunga.
Well, not just the name, but the idea of Chunga as this gypsy mutant vacuum cleaner.
But Paul Buff is the one who invented the vacuum cleaner, this weird apparatus at the studio. I think I just read that in.
That was possibly the starting point of it, but then it became just simply an industrial vacuum.
Right.
But my recollection is, and I didn't know about the Paul Buff thing until recently either, which would have put it much earlier.
Right.
My recollection is that Roy and whoever else was around in the studio was goofing on this idea of the gypsy mutant industrial vacuum cleaner. So again, this is just conjecture on my part. I'm wondering if Frank got the idea from them.
Yeah. Well, the thing
Curious as to what any of those band members would have to say about it.
Well, if we meet them and interact, we'll ask them that.
Yeah, I'd like to know that.
Yeah, because see, as I look at the chart, I think of Don Preston and Frank in the early '60s used to do jazz improvisations with biological science films projected on the wall around the performance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now you've got some. Well, not necessarily biological. There might be something there, but you got a dinosaur. Now that's extinct. You got the 39 Chevy. In a sense, it's extinct.
Well,
then you got animals that
when I was coming up with these, they weren't intellectualized on that level. What they were personal references and personal responses to an actual star chart. So, for instance, and some of them are more obvious than others, Ursula Major.
Yeah.
Ursa Major is the Big Dipper, right?
Yeah.
So, for some reason, Ursula, and isn't Ursula actually a bear?
Yeah, I think so.
The scientific name for a bear?
Yeah.
Well, that's probably where I got the idea for it being a bear, was that I kind of goofed on the name and connected it to Ursula and then connected that to a bear and then looked for a picture of a bear, and drew this funny bear guy.
Okay, well then this is a map of the eternal question asked you.
Actually, some of the illustrations are direct steals from old cuts, too. I'm going to make that clear.
Old
and
cuts.
That's one of them, I think. It was from an very old, like 16th century engraving of some mythic animal or something.
Right. But the thing is that as you say this, I look at the map, and the big question asked you often is, how much did you influence Frank? How much was his idea instructed to you? This dialectic between you and Frank.
Yeah.
And this is a map of that, because you've got your personal input and punning on words, but then you have Zappa reference points right out of albums.
I don't think it's a very good example, simply because most of it's my work. I'm using references because it's a Zappa album. But they're my references to his stuff. So
right.
It's not a very good actual illustration of the dialect of the dialogue between us.
It's an illustration of the effect of Frank on you.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But not only that, because it was also, I mean, there are references in there, but there are also other references that don't relate to Frank.
Yeah, so a good way...
Or to the stars, you know.
That's right. So a better way to look at this and more in general is to look at the puns on the original map. That's what's going on here.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. So you have Gemini, and it looks like a young Jimmy Carl.
Gemini is obviously Gemini.
Oh, that is the actual place of that, yeah.
Well, that's what it's a pun on, is Gemini.
But it doesn't refer to Jimmy Carl Black.
No, actually, well, it could, you know, but the drawing is of Chang and Eng, Siamese twins that were actually joined just that way. I mean, I did a drawing of this photo of these two guys.
Right, so...
And I called it Gemini because it was, you know, Gemini.
Right, now you have here Coma Bernice, the plumber. Now, this is maybe synchronicity. In one of Frank's first interviews in the New York Times in '66 at the Garrick Theater, before they became the regular, I remember it was like the first time a major media interviewed him, and they were interested in the mothers, and he was saying that he was describing what musicians play, and he says, we don't know who the drummer is. We're not sure who the drummer is. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's a metaphorical statement. But then later he talks about, basically he considers what he's doing is being a plumber.
Yeah.
Now, you've got the plumber there.
But I don't think there's a connection.
Right. Now, that's what's funny. There's the synchronicity, is that I know about the plumber reference, and I...
Yeah, but, you know, when you've got such a vast field to work with, you're going to have a lot of, let's say, coincidence.
Right. Right, coincidence. But the funny thing...
Whether or not there's synchronicity is, you know...
Well, look at this. You've got promiscuous.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a pun on some star?
Where's promiscuous?
Below David Booty's on the bottom right, above the swimming guy, you see porridge, promiscuous, alibi, alimentary, alcove.
Yeah, those are all puns on stars.
Right. Now, you know, in Broadway the Hard Way, you got a song called Promiscuous about AIDS and the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, but again, I don't think there's a connection.
Right. So the thing is that one could think that this thing was done by Frank. You know what I mean? This is Frank. There's so much Frank stuff in there. But it's a fraud in the sense that it has nothing to do with Frank. It's all Calvin Schenkel.
Well, I would say it's a fraud.
Well, no, it's not. Most people, like, I was impressed when I said, "Oh, Frank's got a whole system. Well, Frank has organized his world, his universe for me." So I would project Frank, and I would project Frank into it and connect it up, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is, Frank had nothing to do with it.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it had nothing to do with it.
On the level of the effect of Frank on you is the level he's involved.
Yeah, but you know, I don't want to absolutely say that he didn't have any input, because he might have had some, but primarily, you know, 90% of the puns I came up with, or I came up with Lascaro when we were just sitting around goofing.
Right, but did he say, "I want a star map"? What was the most general?
I don't remember if he did or not. That may have been something that I came up with as an interesting thing for the back cover, you know, relating to the front cover.
Right. I mean, I bet you'd be hard pressed to say what Frank told you. Now, for example, a lot of the album covers have a hand coming in. All right, like the hand on the front below the sofa.
Mm-hmm.
In '77, I asked Frank in Toronto at the record signing. I said, there's the motif of the hand coming in, like on Uncle Meat and that. It shows up in a lot of albums, like Chunga's Revenge. I said, what is the meaning of the hand? And he says, well, you got to have something to show the people with. So he just brushed off the question.
Right.
Now,
that's probably why. Well,
is it you responsible for the hand thing?
On the cover of this one?
Or Uncle Meat?
Well, Uncle Meat is entirely my concept.
And the hand is there.
I'm responsible for that, and the reason there's a hand there is not by any great design. It just simply, it was a piece that I did, and I used elements that I had, and you know, there were elements in the material that I was collaging that was what I put down. You know, I didn't think, oh, I have to have a hand here because it means this or that, you know. Now, on the cover of One Size Fits All, the hand of God was pretty much dictated by Frank.
He wanted the hand in there.
I remember him specifically saying he wanted, God's hand here in the front, and he wanted him to be saying Devon, Devon,
Right.
So that was Frank's concept.
Yeah, so I asked the right...
I illustrated it based on that simple premise, so. Now, the hand on Chunga's Revenge on the console, I think that was Frank's concept too, It's hard for me to remember that one specifically.
Right, but that means I asked the right person about the hand. You're not going to tell me what you think what is meant, or there was no meaning. But Frank, since he put it in there might have been a meaning.
On one size fits all, it's fairly obvious what the meaning is because that's the meaning in the song.
Right, but then it's on Chunga's Revenge, which he put in.
That was earlier, right?
Right, but he did not put the hand in Uncle Meat.
And on Chunga's Revenge was, a reference to Frank controlling it.
Right, but the hand on Uncle Meat is not Frank's input. That's yours.
That's totally mine.
Okay, who put the finger spinning Saturn or Jupiter above?
Well, that was me, but again, once the concept had been pretty much, it's still part of the same general concept that the heavens are being created,
Oh, okay.
It's a fairly obvious
yeah, so
based on that,
Yeah, so the front cover is more matching with Frank's idea of the Magic Sofa song and all that.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas the back is Calvin, really is Calvin.
Yeah. Now, some of the details on the front, are Calvin, too.
Right. Like Crab Nebula goes here.
Yeah, and then the little diagrams on the top and all, and the square Saturn and all that's mine.
And you got Crab Nebula, you got Dwarf Nebula, on Weasel Rip My Flesh, and then you've got the Crabgrass Baby later in Thingfish, so your Crab Nebula is synchronistically, coincidentally, fits into Frank's thing. So that one could be a Ben Watson and look through all this and think it's Frank's design.
That's part of the problem of looking for every possible connection.
Right.
And drawing those conclusions because they're not necessarily correct.
Right, and this is why when
some of them might not be, and I think part of what Frank was doing was satirizing people doing that.
That's right. Now that's why when Ben proposed writing the book, his friend said, "You're crazy. You can't analyze Frank's stuff." But he did a pretty good job.
He did a pretty good job, although
it's full of errors. This
full of errors, but
he made the effort.
Also, his basic premise, I think, is totally off the wall. But
right. But see, he made the effort and he did it.
Yeah.
And even though Frank is
good dialogue, but you have to realize that there's bound unless you're talking to everybody involved and get all of the connections, you're bound to have errors. When you do that.
Right. Did you say he starts the dialogue? Is that what you just said?
I say in general, I think that is an interesting dialogue to do. To look into any artist's references, but you have to realize that they're not necessarily correct. They're your interpretation.
Yeah, and it may not be accurate.
Not be accurate, and it may be. Particularly in my work, I know a lot of times I will use something simply for pure visual purposes and not have any meaning behind it. In fact, want to strip the meaning out of it and just have it as a visual thing.
Right. So that here's the point. If people think it's silly to analyze Frank, and then Ben makes the effort too, and he pulls off at least 50% interesting pattern out of it, but then you enjoy him going into it and
I'm saying it's silly. I don't think it's silly at all. I think that it's a fun thing to do. But what's silly is to look at it as a full analysis.
Right.
Look at it as a totally correct analysis.
But I'm thinking how these people said, don't even attempt to analyze Frank to Ben. He goes ahead, and as a result, you feel satisfied because he goes into it and gives you credit.
Yeah, I'm certainly satisfied with that, but then that doesn't take much to satisfy that.
Yeah.
Since I've never gotten much credit before it,
Okay, well, did you bring in the earthquake idea at the bottom?
Yeah.
That's yours, yeah, because that is so much, in a way, Ben makes a big deal out of that earthquake motif, you know what I mean? It's amazing how much Ben projects. He should have talked to you. He didn't have access to you, I guess, but he should have discussed this chart with you.
Could have.
Beg pardon?
He could have talked to me. I'm always available.
Right. I guess he just didn't realize maybe how much you had input on the back of this.
Perhaps.
Okay, so the looking at this, do you see the behind the spinning Saturn? That's your mechanical designs. You put those, you found those and put them in.
Yeah.
Now, how much did you see the 20th century as a retrieval of the medieval environment, the medieval reality, that you're always painting the mothers within, like on Playground Psychotics, and the placing of Frank in medieval settings is a major thing.
Ahead of their time.
Okay. Well,
ahead of their time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one I really blew, actually.
You blew it?
I blew it, yeah.
How would you say that?
In that I didn't really achieve what I was after because I ran out of time.
Oh, because
I would say that's pretty much just a study of what I wanted to do, which was to do a more elaborate painting.
Right.
But there wasn't enough time, so I had to kind of just. And plus, at the last minute, I found out that it wasn't a Zappa album; it was a Mother's album, and no one told me that originally until after the artwork was practically done. So I had to redo the whole thing to show all the mothers instead of just Frank.
Oh, I see. And that's why you ran out of time.
Yeah, that's one big reason.
Because here's the thing: I always thought it was interesting that you had 1348 on Uncle Meat, and Frank later said that he considered his work a time capsule that you should open in 200 years or so, and then you have a time capsule historical reportage presentation of the 20th century, or at least the part of the century.
Yeah, but I think you know what he really. I don't want to say what he meant, but in the reference that I'm drawing in my mind when he's talking about that, he wanted people in the future to know that there were a lot of freaks and weird people around and creative people around, and not just the homogenized mainstream concepts and history, that lives on,
right,
as history.
That's right.
So I think that's what he meant by that, more sociologically, than his art.
Right. Okay.
That's what I got from the reference that I'm thinking of when you mentioned that.
Right. Well, you just supported. I think that you remember. You know why? You know when Frank got busted in Cucamonga, it began with a policeman saying, "We want our cops and our force to have a better understanding of freaks and perverts and the people they arrest." Now, maybe you don't know this. So he said to Frank, "You have a lot." There was an article newspaper on you in September '64 in the local press. You have all this archival stuff in recording studio. We want you to interview abnormal people and freaks and that, and make a training film for the police. All right?
Uh-huh.
Then Frank got really excited. He had a chance to, implement his documentary idea, and it would be for a useful cause, and he'd get paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turned out in retrospect it was a setup, because they then came back and didn't develop that idea. They just said, "Oh, we want a porno tape."
Right.
And it was the cops, but they were disguised as a salesman.
Right.
And the porno tape was set up, and he got busted for the audio porno tape. So he never got to do the training film. But when I heard that, and it comes out in a Dave Wally interview with him, and it's only summarized in Wally's book. It's when you hear the interview, Frank goes into more detail about it, and how much he wanted to do this training film. I see Freakouts as an elaboration of that idea. Well, I'm not working for the Cucamonga police anymore, but I'm working for Americans and saying, look, this is a training film about freaks and how these people go casting off outmoded institutional attitudes. You Americans should know about these people so you'll learn how to relate to them. And the training film is the thing that happened in Cucamonga that he replayed all the way through, and you just convinced and confirmed that by saying his whole work is to show the 22nd, 23rd century how there were freaks and people who do stuff that is not normal in the 20th century.
Right. Well, he says that himself very specifically, I think, on Baby Snakes, isn't he?
Yeah, that's the title. That's the title. The people who do stuff that is not normal.
Yeah.
That Baby Snakes is an elaboration of his first assignment from the Cucamonga police.
Right.
And now you can say his assignment is for the 23rd century to understand the content that was hidden in the 20th century.
Yeah, but I think that's true of all time anyway, and that it's also false because even though the mainstream history exists, there is still a way to look into more fringe history, you know? I mean,
Right, it's in fairy tales, it's in what they call the oral tradition and things like that. There's always an underground carrying it on.
right, but
Right.
I think even if you look deeper than just what is right on the surface, you know, you're going to find it. It's more a question of how deep you look than what the society portrays.
Right. And so now we were
Well,
talking...
to find it, you know?
Yeah. Now you see Frank as, in terms of time capsule, to show what's happened. And when you were with Frank, did you feel that he was, when you talk about him being a genius, like Nige talks about how you were around a weird person when you were with Frank, in terms of it was like being with a drug, and he put you in an altered state of mind as you interacted with him, walking around the city or on the road. Did you get that feeling being with Frank, that his being put you in an altered state of mind as you interacted with him?
Not really, because that was pretty much my state.
You guys were pretty similar in a lot of ways.
Well, I think that I was I was in that state myself. I mean,
Right.
I saw things the way Frank did in many ways, not as cynically, you know.
Yeah.
Because I think that he was very cynical. Again, I'm talking about the period more when I was involved with him, so I couldn't. Although looking at his art, I would say it was, you know, obviously a theme throughout his life, but I wasn't a cynical. In fact, I'm probably the opposite. I'm totally optimistic, totally uncynical.
And more like Beefheart. That's what you pick up. You're more like Beefheart in that way.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I think so.
So,
But
well, are you a genius then? Did you have genius sensibilities like Frank?
well, that wouldn't be for me to say.
No, but what if you? I mean, we'd have to have You didn't interact with Nige. You weren't around at that point.
No.
No.
I wasn't. I remember vaguely. Actually, I'm not even sure that I do remember.
Right. So we'd have to use Nige as a gold standard to have her interact with you, or I don't know about now, but back then, to see if what the comparison would be, because her only reference point is Frank at this point.
Perhaps, you know, but I don't know that I would. See, I'm very much an introvert, so I don't know that.
You could do that to her.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that I would be able to really fully show my intellect just in that situation. So
Do you feel that you did with Frank?
that I did what?
Showed your intellect with Frank when you interacted with him while working on the album?
Yeah, I think in terms of the art that I did, yeah.
Did he ever compliment you?
Yeah.
Not only in your work, but say, you're a pretty smart guy, you know, like a man-to-man kind of statement?
Not in those terms, you know, but I'm sure that he would have said something that would have essentially meant that, you know.
Right. And he meant it
to a very specific thing, you know, about something that I had done.
Yeah, he would comment that way on what you'd done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because Frank was very lucky, you know, to have people like Ian Underwood or Tommy Mars or yourself show up when he needed someone to do that. You know what I mean? Like, he was lucky that you came along, and if you were in the same kind of, you were similar in ways.
I'd say he was fortunate in that respect, as opposed to lucky.
Well, why was he fortunate? Why was he blessed? Why did that happen? Is there a law, an order working out behind the scenes? A fate?
Perhaps. I mean, I think so.
Yeah, you think so. Yeah.
That just reflects my view of reality.
Right, because when Frank says anything, anytime, anywhere, for no reason at all, that has really, the faith of operating that way is that there is the complementary situation, the quote from Frank, the universe works whether you know it or whether you understand it or not.
Yeah, but what does that mean?
Well, it means that he always used to say in the late 60s, my main concept is I like allowing things to, he says, I like the idea of allowing things to happen.
Yeah.
But then the Village Voice does an article a few months ago calling Frank the ultimate control freak.
Yeah.
And that's erroneous. There's a control factor, but they're not acknowledging how much Frank let things happen.
I think that's true, yeah.
And then you and Ian Underwood and these people...
The Voice article, too, and I thought how true it was in a way, because he was very controlling, but more of people than of events.
But he wanted, as Tommy Mars points out in our dialogue with him, we had incredible dialogue with Tommy Mars. You might want to hear it sometime, the audio at least, but the day after we talked to you last week. And but he said he understood that he was paid to be creative. Whereas Don Preston, they still were arguing over who was doing what in the 60s. And so he came in and he said Frank gave him great creativity and creative input. And so if one understood that the control factor was you've got to be good and you've got to be creative within Frank's general developing of a song and developing the lyrics.
Yeah.
So Frank is right in the interval between controlling and allowing things to happen.
I think that's true in terms of his art.
Yeah.
But from a standpoint of being someone working for Frank, fortunately I was around in the earlier years, but I think in the later years, and I think that's probably the reason why you're talking about Tommy Mars' relationship and his understanding of it. I think that Frank at that point knew exactly what he wanted. Right,
and that's why Don and them were there in the early laboratory.
They were there as really, I think that if they have, I think they have a certain right to feel betrayed in a sense, because
it wasn't all so precise at that point.
Well, also it wasn't all just Frank's thing, and you're working for Frank.
Right, he had not established himself yet.
He kind of established that later.
Yeah.
When he did, he almost established it retroactively, which is perhaps why Don might be, feel betrayed.
Yeah.
But of course, I don't want to read into. This is my understanding, my view of it.
And as we're talking this last 5 minutes, I'm staring at the phrase "of Mars" beside the the spinning Saturn or whatever planet that is. That's Saturn, I guess, with the ring.
Actually, not of Mars. It's just Mars. And
it says of Mars.
Well, no, that's supposed to be a symbol.
Oh, okay. That's a symbol. All right.
That's a symbol for Mars, perhaps.
A Greek symbol or an alchemical symbol?
I think it's like the astrological symbol, I guess, for Mars.
Oh, okay.
There's one over Mercury, too.
Oh, I see. All right. All right. So the thing is that Don Preston, he joins Frank in the middle 60s. He's a musician. He's accomplished. He wants to carve out a career for himself. Frank's, carving out a career. It's like the image in 200 Motels where all the band members are in the starting gates after they decorate themselves up, right? So you get the mothers are at the starting gates in 65, 66. And then Frank becomes a leader position. And I asked Elliot Ingber, I said, why did you guys let Frank lead? And he said, well, he was the guy with the chops and with the stuff. He had the songs, the material.
Yeah.
So he kind of said Frank should get the edge.
I think so. I agree with that. Again, it's a very complex subject, and for me, I'm just going to give you my take on it from my point of view, and particularly because I have my own disagreement with the Zappa Family Trust, which is far from being resolved.
Right.
And I'm sure it's going to be, again, complex, but I don't think the point is whether or not they should all be equals, or whether or not, particularly in the context of what Frank was creating at the time, whether or not he took over something that, previously existed, or that he established himself as the leader of something that maybe started out as more or less of an equal relationship, But it wasn't that so much as that he took over totally, And I think, I don't know all the details about their business relationship, but I think that their claim is, and they had a lawsuit over this,
yeah,
and I believe they won. Don't know what the actual outcome was of everything, but
did they win, Jerry?
It's hard to. Depends on what whose point of view you're looking at.